Don't belong here. The help doesn't sit at the family table. My sister-in-law said it quietly, the way people do when they want to wound you without witnesses. Then she picked up her glass of Malbec and tipped it, deliberately, slowly, over the front of my blouse. The one I'd ironed twice that morning because I wanted everything to be perfect. The wine spread cold and dark across the white fabric. The conversation at the nearby tables stuttered. A few heads turned. She smiled and looked away. I didn't reach for a napkin. I didn't excuse myself. I sat perfectly still, feeling the wine go cold against my skin, and I looked at my husband across the table. He had seen everything. He picked up his fork and resumed eating. That was the moment I stopped being sad about any of it. Before I tell you how I ended that dinner party in under 10 minutes, and why my mother-in-law left the house she thought she owned before dessert was served, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this goes. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I do. I acquire distressed commercial properties across southern Ontario, hotels that are bleeding money, event spaces that banks are trying to offload, restaurants that owe more than they're worth. I find them before anyone else does. I buy them quietly, and I turn them around. I've been doing it since I was 26. I am 31 now. In that time, I have purchased, renovated, and repositioned 11 properties. One of them is a private dining club in Oakville called the Meridian, a converted Edwardian house on the lake. 12 private rooms, a wine cellar that I personally restocked, a waiting list for memberships that stretches 8 months. My husband's family had no idea I owned it. My husband knew. He had always known. But he made a choice, early in our marriage, to keep his family's respect by keeping my success invisible. He told them I worked in property management. He let them assume I was a mid-level administrator somewhere, shuffling paperwork, collecting a modest salary. I allowed it because I was raised to keep my head down, and because I thought it was temporary, and because I loved him enough to be patient. That was my mistake. His family is what my grandmother would have called a performance family. Everything they own is leased or financed or mortgaged to within an inch of its life, but the performance is flawless. His mother drives a Range Rover on a payment plan she's been extending for 4 years. His sister, the one who poured wine on me, lives in a condo in Burlington that she purchased with a down payment that came, I later found out, from a private loan. His father retired early and has been living off a line of credit disguised as an investment portfolio. They had decided very early that I was not good enough for this family. I was too quiet. I dressed plainly. I drove a 10-year-old Subaru that I owned outright because I have never in my life paid interest on a depreciating asset. I did not have a LinkedIn profile with an impressive title. I did not talk about my work at dinner, so they filled in the blank themselves. They decided I was nobody, and once a family like that decides you are nobody, every gathering becomes a referendum on that verdict. My sister-in-law's name is Lee. She has perfect highlights and a Peloton, and approximately $47,000 in unsecured debt, though I didn't know the full number until later that night. What I did know was that she had been chipping away at me for 3 years. Little comments about my car. Suggestions that I might want to update my wardrobe before the next family event. Questions about when I was going to find a real career. Asked in that light, curious voice that lets the speaker claim innocence if you ever push back. The dinner was her parents' anniversary. 35 years. The venue was the Meridian. My husband had booked it without telling me which property he'd chosen. He does the social calendar. I do the finances. That is the division we had settled into. When I pulled up to the valet and saw the stone facade, the window boxes, the brass plate by the door, I understood immediately what was about to happen. Or rather, I understood that I had been given something I had not asked for and did not yet know what to do with. I said nothing. I went inside. I smiled at the front-of-house manager, a woman named Britt, who has worked for me for 2 years, and I shook my head slightly when her eyes widened with recognition. She nodded. She understood. I would be a guest tonight. For approximately 45 minutes, I was. The table was set in the Lakeview room, the largest private dining room, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the water going gray in the early November dark. My mother-in-law had ordered the tasting menu for the whole table without asking anyone. 8 courses. Wine pairings. She announced the price casually, the way people do when they want you to know they can afford something. What she didn't know was that the family rate she received, 30% below menu price, existed because my husband had quietly asked me for it 6 weeks earlier, and I had agreed, wanting the evening to go well. I had subsidized the dinner that was being used to humiliate me. I sat at the far end of the table, away from the center conversation. His mother and Lee held court at the other end, laughing and refilling each other's glasses. My husband sat in the middle, equidistant, the way he always positioned himself between two weather systems and called it peace. I watched Lee work the room. I've seen the type before in boardrooms and due diligence meetings, the person who establishes authority not through competence, but through the strategic destruction of someone else's credibility. Pick the quietest person in the room. Make them smaller. Use the audience's laughter as currency. It's not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It's social accounting. She was insecure in this room. The Edwardian ceilings, the sommelier, the quiet formality of a place that cost more per head than she could comfortably spend. She felt out of her depth, so she reached for the easiest tool available, me. The comment about the help not sitting at the family table came after the third course. I had made a small observation about the wine Toss Pinot Noir from the 20-mile bench, one I had personally selected for the cellar, and Lee had smiled with her teeth and said what she said. Then the wine. Then silence. My husband looked at his plate. I sat with a cold stain against my skin and did the accounting I had been refusing to do for 3 years. I thought about the winter I spent driving 2 hours each way to my husband's parents' house every other weekend because his mother was going through something difficult and needed family close. I ate at that table every second Sunday for 14 months. I brought food. I fixed things. I sat with her through the long, dark afternoons when she didn't want to talk, just wanted a body in the room. I did it because I thought that was how you built something real with a family. I thought about the $22,000. My husband's business had a cash flow problem 2 years into our marriage. A client had gone under and taken a substantial receivable with them. I transferred the money from my personal account without being asked. No documentation, no promissory note, because I thought we were building a life together and that was what you did. The business recovered. The $22,000 was never mentioned again. I thought about the down payment on the Burlington condo. Lee had needed $11,000 to make the deal work. My husband had asked me quietly late one night whether we could help. I said yes. We transferred it as a gift because that's what his family did. Gifts that were never acknowledged as gifts and never repaid, just absorbed into the general myth of the family's good fortune. I had been feeding people who had decided at some point I couldn't identify, that I was the help. I looked at Britt, who was standing near the service entrance watching me with careful eyes. I looked at my husband, who was talking now to his father, his back slightly angled in my direction. I looked at Lee, who was laughing at something her mother had said. The wine glass back in her hand, the incident already archived and dismissed. I picked up my own glass. I took a sip. I thought, no. I took out my phone, not to scroll. I opened the property management dashboard for the Meridian. Active event, Lakeview Room, client name, family booking under my husband's account. I scrolled to the contract section. Every rental agreement at my properties contains a clause I introduced after an incident 2 years earlier when a guest berated one of my servers so badly she cried in the walk-in cooler. The clause is straightforward: any verbal abuse, physical contact, or deliberate harassment directed toward staff or ownership is grounds for immediate, non-refundable termination of the event. The clause had been invoked twice before. A groom who threw a glass. A corporate client whose VP had grabbed a server's arm. Lee had deliberately poured wine on me. She didn't know she had just handed me a signed permission slip. I looked at the room. My room. The plasterwork I had paid to restore. The floors I had refinished in white oak. The wine I had curated. The staff I had hired and trained, and, when the pandemic nearly finished us, kept on payroll out of my own pocket for 4 months, because I was not going to let people who depended on me lose their income because of something none of us had caused. They were standing on my floor, eating my food, drinking my wine, and they had decided I was the help. I sent Britt one message. It said, Clause 7, Lakeview, now. I stood up. I didn't smooth my blouse. I walked the length of the table to where Britt was already moving toward the room's main entrance. The conversation stuttered as I passed. By the time I reached the head of the table, the room had gone quiet in the particular way rooms do when something has shifted and nobody yet knows what. Lee looked up. I think she expected an outburst. I think she had been waiting for one, had been trying to provoke one all evening, because an outburst from me would confirm everything she had decided about who I was. Instead, I looked at her for a moment, and then I looked at the rest of the table, and I said, clearly and without any particular drama, I need to let you all know that there's been a contract violation this evening, and this event is going to be concluding early. My mother-in-law put down her fork. What are you talking about? Lee laughed, the jagged kind. She's lost it. Someone take her phone. I'm not a guest tonight, I said. I'm the owner of this property. What happened earlier constitutes a violation of the venue's harassment policy under the terms of the rental agreement that was signed when this booking was made. I'm invoking that clause now. The event is terminated, non-refundable. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people recalibrating. Lee was the first to find her voice, which didn't surprise me. Who do you think you are? You don't own anything. You work in property management. You drive a 15-year-old, 10-year-old, I said. And I don't manage properties. I own them. This one I purchased 4 years ago from a receivership for $840,000. I've put another $300 into it since. The Meridian is mine. The wine you poured on me was from my cellar. Her mother stood up. This is a family dinner. You can't do this. I can, I said. And I want to be clear that I'm sorry this is how tonight is going. I didn't want this. But I also want to be clear about something else. I looked at my husband. He had gone very still. I want to be clear about the full picture, I said, because I think there are some things this family has been allowed not to know. I opened the documents I had pulled up on my phone while I was still sitting at the far end of the table. I connected to the room's display screen, the one used for corporate presentations, the one I had installed 18 months earlier, and I cast the first document. It was the promissory note I had drawn up 18 months after the fact, when my accountant had told me I needed to formalize the $22,000 for tax purposes. My husband had signed it. It was technically a shareholder loan. Status, outstanding. Then the second document, the transfer record for Lee's down payment. $11,000 transferred from my personal account. Status, gift, never acknowledged. Then the third. My husband's parents had refinanced their home in Mississauga 3 years ago. The second mortgage, taken out when rates were rising and the bank had declined their application, had been arranged privately. The lender on that document was a numbered company. That numbered company is mine. I hadn't planned to use any of this. I had formalized these documents for accounting reasons, not ammunition. But standing in that room, in a wine-stained blouse, in a building I had pulled out of bankruptcy and rebuilt from the studs, looking at the family that had spent 3 years deciding I was nobody, I realized that my silence had not been grace. It had been a slow and steady surrender. My mother-in-law was looking at the screen. Her face had done something complicated. She knew about the second mortgage. She did not know who held it. That's my company, I said. I'm the lender on your refinancing. I've been collecting those payments for 3 years. The room stayed quiet. My father-in-law said, That's not possible. We dealt with a mortgage broker. You did, I said. He placed the loan through my holding company. I didn't arrange it to have leverage. I arranged it because the broker called me and said you were going to lose the house if no one stepped in, and my husband asked me not to let that happen. I looked at Lee. I paid for the down payment on your condo. I don't want it back. I never wanted anything back. I wanted to be part of this family. I sat at your mother's table for 14 months because I thought that's how you did it. I drove 2 hours each way because I thought showing up was the point. She had nothing to say to that. First time all evening. I looked at my husband last. He was looking at the tablecloth. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, I said, and I meant it. I'm doing it because I have been quiet for a very long time and the quiet got interpreted as an invitation. I need everyone in this room to have the full picture. I turned off the display. I looked at Britt, who was standing at the door with two of the floor staff. The event is over, I said. Please offer the guests their coats. They have 15 minutes. I walked out of the Lakeview room. I went through the service corridor to my office, a small room I kept off the kitchen, nothing in it but a desk and a filing cabinet and a photograph of the building the day I got the keys, all scaffolding and missing windows. I sat down. I listened to the sounds of the dinner ending, chairs scraping, voices low and careful, the quiet choreography of a staff that knew how to clear a room with dignity. Britt knocked 20 minutes later. They're gone, she said. Your husband asked me to tell you he's waiting in the car. I looked at the photograph on the wall for a moment. The building, half-gutted and full of potential, the same way most things are before someone decides to do the work. I told Britt to take the rest of the wine from the Lakeview room to the staff room. I told her the evening had gone fine as far as she was concerned, and that I'd handle the paperwork. Then I sat in my office for a while longer, not crying, not celebrating, just sitting with the specific stillness that comes after a long time of carrying something you finally put down. I had not built what I built to win a dinner party. I had built it because I was the kind of person who saw a broken thing and thought, I could fix that. I had done it with buildings and with my marriage and with this family, quietly and without credit, for years. What I understood now, sitting in that office, was that not everything broken wants to be fixed. Some things are broken because the people inside them have decided that's how they like it. My silence had given them permission to keep deciding. Outside, my husband was in the car. The second mortgage sat in my filing cabinet. The condo in Burlington was titled to Lee. The Subaru was in the lot, paid off, reliable, mine. I poured myself a glass of the Taz. I sat with it in the quiet. The lake was invisible now in the dark, but I knew it was there. I would deal with the rest of it in the morning, clearly and without drama, the way I dealt with everything. The debt would be addressed. The relationships had already foreclosed. Not because I was angry, but because I finally understood the difference between people who are building something and people who are simply waiting to inherit yours.